Weaving is one of the oldest crafts in the world. Renato D'Agostino, an expert in weaving and weaving mills, explains which technologies and production processes are used today and how to recognize high-quality woven fabrics. Mr. Agostino, welcome to Business Talk am Kudamm. Today you are bringing to light something that I think has been forgotten for far too long. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
On that note, let's get started. We have already mentioned that you are an expert in textile production with a focus on weaving. I would love to know more about that. How did you come to specialize in this field?
Also das ist in der Familie angeboren. Das heißt, meine Eltern sind...
Well, it runs in my family. That is, my parents emigrated from Italy to Switzerland many years ago and met in the local weaving mill. We grew up, my brother and I, in an apartment building that belonged to the weaving mill, and I often visited my parents there, which was still possible back then. I went out with my dad as a night watchman, very interesting. Then my brother did his commercial apprenticeship at the weaving mill, and I did my commercial apprenticeship at a supply company for weaving mills. That's how I grew up with weaving, and it still defines my life today.
So bin ich mit Weberei groß geworden und das bestimmt heute noch mein Leben.
I also remember how I used to make woven things as a child when my parents wanted me to. We always wove pictures together. What fascinates you personally about weaving?
Also als Weben muss man...
Well, with weaving, you have to differentiate between what is clothing, what are household textiles, and what are technical textiles.
Jetzt landläufig kennen wir in erster Linie mal Bekleidung. Was mich aber noch mehr...
Generally speaking, we are primarily familiar with clothing. But what fascinated me even more than clothing were the technical textiles in our everyday lives.
Wir haben in der Raumfahrt Textilien, das Gewebe.
The microphone we both wear has textiles in it. We have textiles and fabrics in space travel, for example in heat shields. We have fabrics in car airbags, which are woven, seat belts, which are woven. Fabrics are in sportswear, for example in extreme sports, where they have to be both flexible for movement and still protect from extreme cold or heat. There are textiles and fabrics everywhere, and that's what fascinates me about this world.
Und das ist das, was mich fasziniert an dieser Welt.
That's interesting. I imagine that a lot of people haven't even made that connection yet.
That's right.
Is it true that there are very few weaving mills left in Europe? And the question is, do you have an explanation why this industry is dying?
Also Gewebe im Sinne von Bekleidung ist richtig?
Well, that's true for clothing fabric. We have fewer weaving mills producing clothing today. If we do have weaving mills that produce clothing, then they are often companies that are active in high-quality types of fabrics. For example, the Italian fashion world, fashion in general, everything that has to do with high-quality suits. Otherwise, you have to see, fabric is part of people's basic needs, so it has to remain affordable.
Ansonsten muss man sehen, Gewebe gehört...
What we've experienced in Europe over the last 40 or 50 years has been an increase in prosperity. And when prosperity increases, labor usually becomes more expensive, production costs become more expensive, and if you as a production company cannot pass on your costs to your sales prices, then it becomes difficult.
Wird in der Regel die Arbeitskraft teurer, die Produktionskosten werden teurer.
At the same time, the borders have been opened from Asia. We have received cheap fabrics from Asia, and this has resulted in such a flow. I myself have seen how weaving mills have emigrated to Eastern Europe. Then it also became more expensive in Eastern Europe because of the expansion of the EU. And then people moved to Asia completely. We have gone to China, we have gone to India, we have looked for extended workbenches. In fact, we are producing less clothing today, both here in Europe and in the United States, but more technical textiles.
Und danach ist man dann ganz nach Asien ausgewandert. Man ist nach China gegangen, man ist nach Indien gegangen, hat verlängerte Werkbänke gesucht. Wir haben in der Tat heute sowohl hier in Europa als auch in den Vereinigten Staaten weniger Bekleidung, aber wir haben mehr technische Textilien.
Weaving is one of the oldest trades in the world. How innovative is this industry, and above all, how are new technologies changing the production processes?
Innovation bei Weben muss man auch hier unterscheiden. Alles, was
Innovation in weaving. Here you also have to differentiate between clothing and technical textiles. In weaving, you cross a horizontal thread with a vertical thread. You have the fabric regardless of what you are producing. But when I look at what we have achieved in fabrics today, especially in the technical areas, I have to say that the industry is more innovative than many people think.
was wir heute vor allem in den technischen Bereichen für
When I look at clothing, well, you can change the design, you can change the color, but the bottom line is the same. There is great innovation in technical fabrics, but not so much in textiles.
Ja, Sie können es designmäßig verändern, Sie können es farblich anders gestalten, aber unter dem Strich ist es das Gleiche. Aber bei den technischen Geweben, ja, große Innovationen.
There are certainly quite big differences in quality. How do you recognize a really good quality woven fabric?
Auch hier, die Gefahr hin, dass ich mich wiederhole, auch hier Unterscheidung, was ist Bekleidung, was ist nicht Bekleidung.
At the risk of repeating myself, the distinction here too. What is clothing? What is not clothing? The following applies to clothing. If you as a manufacturer, for example, use high-quality natural fibers, or if you produce carefully, if you keep a component of the fabric in such a way that it promises what it's there for, then you have quality. But you also have to say that the perception of quality in clothing is very subjective. It's different with technical textiles. You have to follow parameters that are predetermined. One example, if you have an airbag in your car and you have to use it, you're happy that there's no fabric defect in it. That's why the specifications for technical textiles are clear and unambiguous. And they have to be met.
Dann sind Sie froh, dass da kein Gewebefehler drin ist. Deshalb bei den technischen Textilien Vorgaben klar und deutlich und die müssen Sie erfüllen oder nicht.
And how big are the price differences from cheap woven fabrics to really high quality fabrics?
Die Unterschiede sind riesig. Wenn ich es mir vor Augen halte, ein Gewebe aus...
The differences are huge. When I think about it, a fabric from Italy, for example, where high fashion comes from, made of wool, you can easily pay up to 150 euros per meter for the raw fabric. So you can imagine what the final product costs.
Finale Gewebe kostet.
However, if you weave clothing fabrics, for example, suit fabrics in India, then you pay between 1 and 2 euros per running meter, maybe even 1 to 3 euros. But then, of course, you no longer have wool, so you are in the area of synthetic fibers, which are much cheaper. If we then go back to the denim sector, commonly known as jeans, we are in the cent range, up to perhaps 2 to 3 euros per running meter. So there are big differences.
Bereich Denim gehen, landläufig bekannt unter Jeans, da bewegen wir uns im Cent-Bereich bis vielleicht 2-3 Euro pro Laufmeter. Also große Unterschiede.
Und jetzt leben wir ja in einer Zeit, wo die...
We live in a time when sustainability is becoming increasingly interesting, exciting and important. And if I may say so, the textile industry is probably not one of the absolute pioneers in this area. From your point of view, is it due to the producers or is it more a result of consumer behavior?
noch mal reflektieren dürften?
Es liegt wie immer wahrscheinlich an beiden. Also Textil, Gewebe, also Weberei an und für sich ist weder gut noch schlecht. Das gilt für viele andere Bereiche auch. Es wird gut oder schlecht, was wir daraus machen.
As always, it probably comes down to both. Textile fabrics and weaving are neither good nor bad in and of themselves. The same applies to many other areas. What we make out of them determines whether they are good or bad. If you keep in mind that the market always acts according to demand, then you could come to the conclusion, okay, then it's the consumer's fault if it's not as it should be. But even that's not going far enough.
Bezahle dafür faire Preise. Ich stelle die ganze Ware her, zahle meine...
If I look at it in theory, then I say, I am a producer, I buy raw materials, I pay fair prices for them, I produce all the goods, I pay my people fairly, and then of course I take a sustainable approach. I go to the market, I make sure that the transportation routes are short, and on the other hand, as a consumer, I honor the whole thing and am prepared to pay 100 euros for a pair of jeans, to stick with the example. The reality is different. Today, we live in a world where I see that textiles or even fabrics are often, I'll put it bluntly, demonized. And I agree with you. There really are companies around the world that exploit their people, that produce textiles in a way that they shouldn't be produced. But these people are following a consumer trend. So if I can buy a pair of trousers or jeans for $10 in Europe today, whether online or on-site, then hopefully nobody will believe that they have been produced in a fair process, that people have been paid fairly. That won't be the case. That will definitely not be the case.
Eine Hose, eine Jeans kaufen kann für 10 Euro, dann wird ja hoffentlich niemand...
Therefore, the market reacts to demand, and as you said earlier, who is responsible? So if we always assume that we want to maintain our own advantage or that we want to get rich, then we haven't gone far enough. Then I only think of myself, and the producer only thinks of himself. Then we don't get anywhere. There has to be a willingness on both sides to change something. And I'll say it again very casually. I get really annoyed when I see certain posts, regardless of which social media, they come across as too one-sided. Because if we are hyping something today without naming names, if we're hyping something that has to do with fast fashion or ultra-fast fashion, then that's what I want as a consumer. I can't blame anyone for that. If I'm only prepared to pay €5 for such a fabric, I can't blame anyone for having to produce the fabric in such a way that they can still earn something from it.
Regt mich tierisch auf, wenn ich gewisse Beiträge sehe, egal jetzt in welchen sozialen Medien.
Are we all losing out? Yeah, we are all losing out. Of course, we all lose out. This means that we have an obligation on both sides, if we want to save our world, as we always say so beautifully, that everyone does their bit and perhaps thinks outside the box.
Konsumenten das. Da kann ich keinem den Vorwurf machen, wenn ich nur bereit bin, 5 Euro für ein Gewebe zu bezahlen, kann ich niemandem den Vorwurf machen, dass er das Gewebe halt so herstellen muss, dass er auch noch was daran verdient. Verlieren wir alle dabei? Ja, wir verlieren alle dabei. Logisch, wir verlieren alle dabei. Das heißt, wir haben von beiden Seiten her die Verpflichtung, wenn wir dann unsere Welt retten wollen, wie wir schon immer so schön sagen, dass jeder seinen Beitrag leistet und vielleicht einmal über den Tellerrand hinaussenkt. Das ist ein bisschen weit ausgeholt jetzt.
Very exciting. Let me summarize it once again. If we don't just think about ourselves, but if everyone thinks about everyone else, then we are on the right side of things.
If everyone thinks of everyone, then everyone is thought of. But yes, we would then be on the safe side. But the way things are developing today is unhealthy. We all know that. It's unhealthy, but who will take the first step in the other direction?
What about you and me today? And with that, I would like to thank you very, very much for joining us, and we are looking forward to welcome you back again one day.
Thank you very much for your time.